Would you like to see an X-ray of your soul, an X-ray of your emotional infrastructure? Well, just like the body, today with scans, with X-rays, with different types of technologies, we can see the inner workings of what makes us tick. We have a blueprint that will give you a picture of the spectrum of your emotions, an understanding how they work and what you can do to improve them. Check out the description below, the special Omer book, 49 steps. Personal refinement, character development, understanding and cultivating the very nature of your emotional being. From the beginning of time, it's always captured the imagination of so many of us, of people, to the point where some saw it as a sign of apocalypse, sign of the end of the world. People saw it as bad omens. All kinds of sorcery and superstition has been built around it. But regardless, it is one of those phenomena that definitely captures people's imagination. The most ostensible, obvious reason is because it's different. The Baal Shem Tov, I quote often, says the difference between a miracle and a natural event is only one thing: frequency. If the sun were to rise once in our lifetimes, we'd all come running out to see this ball in the horizon rising. There'd be camera crews, pictures. But since it happens every day, and we know it's going to happen tomorrow again, it doesn't excite us. We need a new rush, a new high, a novelty, a sensation, like we see with the solar eclipse. But the fact of the matter is, miracles are happening all the time, including just the sun rising. But this eclipse definitely gets us thinking. I didn't do all the studies, but I've seen hotels are sold out. The prices to be able to travel and be in the areas where the total eclipse will be able to be seen is just testifies to the fascination we have. But what lies really behind it all? Is it just simply a strange phenomenon? Or is there something deeper? I think the question really goes back to the very nature and relationship we have with the very sun and moon in the first place. We know today that in our solar system and in many other solar systems, there are many suns, there are many stars. But it's the sun and moon that has always captured and captivated human interest because they are immediate, in our immediate proximity. It is the sun that brings us light and warmth, and it is the moon that is so much part of our own reality, being that we see it literally every night in all its phases. And these are the two, even though there are stars in the heavens, and we can at times see other planets as well, but these are the two luminaries, the two celestial bodies that have been part of human history from the beginning of time. When you look in the Bible, the biblical story of Genesis, it talks about the creation on the fourth day of creation, the creation of the two great luminaries, the sun and the moon. And then it talks about, actually it calls one the large luminary and then the small luminary, which itself right there begs the question, seems like a contradiction. First you call them two great luminaries, and then say one is great and one is small. So there's much discussion about how they originally were two the same size, and then there was the diminishment of the moon, which we'll talk about shortly. It's the first time this is described. You go through the Bible, of course, the story of Exodus of Egypt begins with the moon, where God speaks to Moses and says to Moses, go outside, look up to heaven. As you look up to heaven, here is the new moon. And this moon will begin the new lunar cycle. This shall become to you and to your people, the Jewish people, your annual cycle. You will count by the moon, which is why the Jewish Hebrew calendar is a lunar calendar. Due to the need to reconcile it with the solar calendar, so every 19 years there are 7 leap years, where an additional month is added. The lunar and solar calendar are approximately 11 and a half days discrepancy. So there's a deficit every year of 11 and a half days. So in order to keep the balance, that the lunar cycle, the lunar year should be aligned with the seasons of the solar cycle, So every 19 years, 7 years, they add another month, a 13th lunar month, which keeps the balance going, more or less. There's a balance, therefore, which itself is also a fascinating discussion of its own. But the moon is associated with the Exodus, with freedom, the new moon, the new birthing. And again, indeed, we look at the moon and the sun, despite the fact that the moon is actually a reflection of the sun. The moon reflects the sun, but we don't look at it like a mirror image. The moon has its own haunted, mysterious aura, that gray, pale look. The moon associated with things from the myths of werewolves, to full moons, to the fact that it affects the tides. So the moon has its own particular romantic role in our lives. You know, you'll see two people who love each other stare at the moon. You don't see them staring at the sun. And it has its own literature and its own poetry and music around the moon, the lunar. So then these two bodies who are right out there, right up as we look into the sky, and by day the sun rules, by night the moon, it fascinates us all the time. So of course when there'll be an eclipse, whether it's a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse, so it's not surprising why we're so taken by that. So what do they say? What do the mystics and what do the thinkers and the spiritualists say about these celestial bodies? What is this thing with the moon and the sun? And their differences and their commonalities. And then, of course, from there we can go and speak about their eclipses, respectively. Now we'll be talking about a solar eclipse. So generally speaking, they're considered to be two models, two archetypes of energy. One is the consistent solar energy, always burning, powerful, bright, which of course gives us the daylight that we have, and so much more of what life is possible, would not be possible without the sun. And the moon is referred to the shifting, the ever-shifting and changes of our lives, the cycles of the moon. You have the first quarter, the full moon, the third quarter, and then the new moon. And these cycles reflect the cycles of life, that we're always waxing and waning. So when you juxtapose the two, the sun would be the representation of consistency. The moon would be representation of change. Now, which one is more important in life? The answer is they're both needed. Life needs consistent foundational elements. Think of the roots of a tree. But then we need growth, we need change, we need shifting, we need constant mobility. So in essence, you really need both. And this explains actually why we do reconcile the lunar and solar cycles, because we want to have the synergy, we want to have the harmony of both these elements. Sometimes the sun is compared to a teacher, an educator. It gives off light. The moon is the recipient, the student. But lest we think it's a one-way street, the student has a certain power that the teacher doesn't have. We see there's a very interesting expression in the Talmud that says, a great scholar, he was asked, where did you learn what you know? He said, I learned much from my teachers. I learned even more from my colleagues. But above all, I learned most from my students. So it's the student, it's the moon. Excuse me. It's the student and the moon that can sometimes enrich the sun. And we see the student-teacher relationship in that sense. The giver, the recipient. But it's not just the giver and recipient, because life is about give and take. Even the recipient gives back, and sometimes even more than the giver gives the recipient. And in that context, the moon and sun take on an entire body of literature. Indeed, entire books written about their relationship. Sometimes they're compared to the masculine and feminine energies, with the masculine maybe being more physically stronger and more powerful, but the feminine having a certain depth and intensity that the lunar energy has. Now, of course, there's overlap, just like it is with the masculine and the feminine, and they each include the other, but it's still, there are the different, we call it tracks. So in life, we truly need both of these, and that's why they play such a central role. Now, when you think of an eclipse, you think of something negative. And when you say something eclipses another, you're essentially saying something is blocking, something is impeding, an impediment. And that's what indeed happens. So it's like almost saying that the solar powerful giving energy is somewhat blocked during those moments of the solar eclipse. On the other hand, it's interesting. Once the eclipse ends, the sun goes back to its full strength. And at the same time, another interesting phenomenon is that you actually can see the corona and other aspects of sunlight that you could not see during the regular day. That's why the study of the solar eclipse is so vital in science and so on. So all of this comes together to lead us to this interesting phenomenon. Why a solar eclipse would capture our imagination. Because it's that very power that's suddenly being impeded. You know, the sun, nothing can stop the sun. Yeah, you can wear shades, it can be a cloudy day. But here you have the moon itself gets in between the earth and the sun. And that's that spot that we see. It's the moon. Which is interesting, because if you think in terms of student and teacher, the teacher is the giver, the student is the recipient. Can the recipient be blocking out the sun? Well, an eclipse would suggest yes. So let's address it from as I mentioned, the Kabbalistic perspective. Whenever we talk about energy and light, there is the concept of direct light, sunlight, and there is refractive light, like a reflection. The refractive light, in this context, like I mentioned with the student, gives back even more than sometimes the direct light does. Let's talk about love. Think of love. The sun and the moon are two lovers. So the sun is giving its light, the moon is receiving. But the moon adds a dimension that the sun cannot have, and at times it's critical to emphasize that. So in that context, even though on one hand the sun is being blocked, but it's being blocked by the moon, there's something about the power of the feminine, the power of the receiving, the power of we'll call it the intimate light, that in sense is even deeper than the expressive light. So essentially we have two forces, we have two lights within us. One is we'll call our expressive light. That's when I'm speaking, I'm communicating, I'm reaching out, I'm aggressive, go-getter. But then there's an intimate light that we all have, which is the time of silence, of repose. When you're not speaking, when you're processing, you're internal and very intimate. So you can see when people are speaking in a conversation, and obviously that's very engaging. But don't ever underestimate silence. Silence has tremendous power to it. The power of silence, sometimes the power of the most intimate experiences don't always express themselves. So if you're talking about taming the elements of the world around us, conquering, somewhat subduing, then yes, you need a force to reach out and do exactly that power, to tame. But when you're talking about expressing and experiencing the deepest parts of us, the exact opposite is needed. Not to go out and get it, just to shut everything down and just let yourself be. So in a sense, the lunar is far more intimate in that way. With the solar being much more the expressive, the lunar and moon was much more that intimate energy. But then comes the eclipse, and the eclipse is that this intimate is now blocking the expressive. It's actually teaching the sun to be silent. That's exactly what's happening. You and your brightness, pause for a moment. And that can be very unnerving to the sun, unnerving to us. Because suddenly, what we usually expect is that the sun is shining, the moon is never there. Yeah, once in a while we'll see that white pale moon even during the day, but it doesn't have much significance because in the brightness of the sun, the moon doesn't seem to have any effect, and suddenly the moon has such dominance. So one of the most important lessons to learn from this mystical, psychological point of view is the power of the intimate, the power of silence over sound, the power of you can say, of the shadow over the light. Because that's exactly what happens. And interestingly, the light of the sun is suddenly expressed in ways that it would never be expressed. There's a certain power that emerges during an eclipse that you don't see during the rest of the time, which indeed is one of the reasons why we have to be very careful when we look at the sun. I mean, in general, you need shades, but especially during an eclipse. So that lesson carries tremendous weight, especially in our time. When you ask yourself, most people think the ones that are going to succeed in life are the go-getters. If you don't take care of yourself, no one else will take care of you. That intimate, quiet, gentle energy is so underappreciated today. If you're quiet, people think, oh, it must be weak. Maybe you don't have an opinion. When that's not the case at all. Sometimes the greatest strengths are the ones that are not loud. The power of silence, the sound of silence. And to think about that is really appreciating another dimension within ourselves, which is very critical. The mystics say that the end of time, meaning when the world reaches its ultimate realization, its ultimate actualization of its potential, will be a feminine age. What does that mean? Feminine age. It's not women playing by the rules of the men. It means a feminine age, that intimate energy will be more powerful than expressive energy. Aggressive energy, everyone thinks, is more powerful because it's just louder. But who says that sound is more powerful than silence? I remember writing an article, The Silent Kohen. It was meant to be a double entendre, Kohen, as in Kohen, the priest in Hebrew is a Kohen, the priest, Kohen. And Kohen is also the Kohens of Zen Buddhism. The Kohens are those experiences, those, I don't want to say exercises, that allows you to go beyond the rational. The famous one is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Forcing us to get beyond our rational structures, to get to a place that's beyond the rational, beyond the paradox. I wrote that article, and it was I spoke about what is more powerful, sound or silence, and I received then a letter from none other than Leonard Cohen, yes, the famous singer-songwriter. And from then on, we developed a relationship. He wrote me a long 30-page gloss, basically taking my article on the Silent Kohen and commenting section by section by section. And then signing off that he's a Cohen. Eliezer HaKohen, he called himself. Leonard Cohen was a Cohen from Montreal, Canada. And a very interesting exchange exactly about this idea. The idea of suspending yourself to experience something greater than yourself. Who has more of that, the sun or the moon? Obviously the moon. Because the sun is an expressor, always giving. In that sense. The moon is able to suspend itself and just receive. And that power of being a receptacle has a tremendous force that's even greater than the giver. And a solar eclipse emphasizes that element. So sometimes, as much as it's important to be aggressive and go-getter, it also can be a detriment to us in times when one should be silent and receiving, listening, absorbing instead of exuding. An interesting statement in the Talmud that says, when you're busy exuding, you can't be absorbing. When you're busy absorbing, you can't be exuding. I explain this very personal to me because for many years that's exactly what I did. I sat at the feet of my great mentor and Rebbe and teacher, and I listened hours and hours, and I was able to retain hours and hours of these talks almost verbatim when there were no tape recorders and no notes were taken. And it changed me as a person. And I've learned the art of listening, a very rare and lost art today. Listening doesn't just mean hearing. It doesn't mean you hear words. It means you absorb, you put yourself aside, you don't process, you allow yourself to experience something beyond yourself, the ultimate transcendence. So in that sense, a solar eclipse could perhaps be the ultimate wake-up call of transcendence. By shifting, by radically, at least for a short period of time, shifting the roles. Suddenly, it is the moon that's more dominant than the sun. It is the silence, it's the lack of light, the darkness, that's stronger than the light. But the real goal of it all is not for darkness to prevail, but for us to see deeper dimensions of ourselves. Who is it that said that we're like a tea bag? You don't know how strong you are until you put it into hot water. There's a certain strength that emerges through restraint, through silence, through an eclipse. And that is part of the whole experience. So then we can look at the solar eclipse more than just a nice phenomenon, take pictures and tell our grandchildren or children and grandchildren, hey, we were there. But it's actually a lessons in life. So when you look at the sun and the moon, and obviously look at it with the proper eyewear to make sure there's no damage, God forbid, done, there are lessons that can be learned, lessons we can share with our children, not just another voyeuristic experience. It says that in the end of time, the moon and sun will go through shifts, because at the end of the day, they're also part of our own life experiences. In many ways, the sun and moon, as much as they're symbiotic, they also have their differences. And yet, they continue their dance, their celestial dance in the heavens, and we observe, we watch, we take it in, and we get inspired, and sometimes even frightened. But we should know that these are ultimately the two witnesses of history, these two luminaries that have been with us throughout thick and thin, through ups and downs, and came to teach us that ultimately life is about light. But there are different types of light. The light of day, the light of night, the light of expression, and the light of silence, of receptivity. And that we need each other, and they need to complement each other, and at times, yes, the moon will make its statement. So as we experience this eclipse, these bodies interacting with each other, let us use the lesson in our personal lives to grow, to know that we should be luminaries in our own right. And sometimes the light of receiving is far greater than the light of giving. I share that with you, and as always, a great honor to speak to you. Simon Jacobson here, the Meaningful Life Center, meaningfullife.com. We are not going to see the end of the world. On the contrary, this can be a new beginning if we use it in the proper way to teach us new dimensions about ourselves and about each other. Be well. Check us out at meaningfullife.com. Share with your friends. Love to hear your thoughts, feedback, comments. And if you have any questions, always be in touch. Thank you so much to all the lunar and solar personalities out there and the combination of both. I look forward to see you shortly again.